On April the 14th, the Titanic received ice warnings through the day and evening over the telegraph, but continued at virtually full speed, 21 knots. At 11:30 p.m., an iceberg was spotted dead ahead, but the chief officer's evasive action caused that iceberg to rip a 300-foot gash below the waterline from the bows along the starboard side. This went beyond the forward watertight compartments whose design led to the Titanic being called unsinkable and made the sinking inevitable. The world's first SOS distress call was sent from the telegraph room. The lifeboats were ordered to be lowered just after midnight, but there were only 16 of them, and although this was the legal requirement, too few to save more than a third of those on board. The last lifeboat was in the water by 2 o'clock, leaving 1,500 people on board to perish, and the Titanic finally sank at 2:20 a.m.
My father went down. He went down with Reverend Carter, a parson who was on board on the deck, you know. Before that, I stood on deck and I said to my dad, look, I said, there's lights over there, a ship is coming to our rescue. And he didn't, the next minute the lights went out. We were left in the dark. So it was only the three of us on the boat deck. And they gradually began in from the third, broke fence, I believe, and managed to get out where the first class were, because they was overcrowded by the time they got time to look for a boat. Because some of the young men, I believe, I was told, they were playing with ice, having a good time. They little didn't think anything was going to happen. They kept saying, it's unsinkable, they kept saying. She'll never sink. But you can't do anything about it. She had a great hold, so the water went in. We had, but all the time we stood on the boat deck, she was sinking, and we didn't feel it because she went head first down, first class, and the other part was still up, and we had to get into the lifeboat.
I have a recollection of being absolutely petrified on a dark night with a sinking ship and people screaming. There wasn't any panic until the lifeboats left, and then there was panic galore. We were down on the ocean. We could hear them running about on the decks and screaming. You can imagine people came up from their cabin, went onto the deck, no lifeboat, tearing around the other side. That's when the panic was there. There wasn't any panic at the time I got in the lifeboat because there weren't enough people up there. And there were enough people there to just get into the lifeboats. But after that, then the others started coming up from their cabins, and there were no boats. Gosh, there was panic. We could hear it. Definitely. Mm-hmm. But the most dreadful sound of all is the sound of people drowning. The screams. Absolutely ghastly. My mother used to say sometimes, she couldn't get me to talk about it for years, but if ever anyone did talk to me, I said that, she used to say yes. But do you remember the silence that followed it? And that's quite right. It says the whole world stood still that night. Once the lights had gone, the ship had gone, the sound had gone. Oh, it was dreadful.
We were lucky. We had a nice lifeboat to get into. The other boat we had to get on, 3 hours we had to wait to get picked up. And another, the Carpathia was it, picked us up. We had to put children in bags and stuff. And I had to climb the ladder to go up. I remember that quite well.
And we were picked up, as you know, in the morning by this little ship, the Carpathia. And so they opened a sort of, I don't know whether the word is right, a hatch in the side of the ship where the luggage used to be laid. And they threw down rope ladders, and people like my mother and other grown-ups had to climb up in mid-ocean up a swaying rope ladder, which she said was the most terrifying thing. The sailor behind sort of holding on. And then what could the children do? We couldn't climb up a rope ladder. So they got these big luggage nets. And the mesh is very wide apart. It's quite a big mesh. Children would have slipped through it, small children. Anyway, our legs and feet would have gone through. So each child was put in a sack. And I remember being petrified when I was put in that sack and it was tied round, and the sack full of these children were put into these huge nets, and quite safely, of course, hauled aboard.
My name's Grace Richards, and my husband was a survivor. As a little boy, aged 3. In fact, the exhibition now, there is a large picture of him taken in the sack that was thrown down from the Carpathia into the lifeboats that the children were put in and then hauled aboard. And there he is standing in his little sack. So I've lent it to the exhibition so that, you know, people can see and be interested. So there was his mother, his grandmother, an aunt and uncle that were brother and sister of his mother, and then there was him, aged 3, and his brother, aged 10 months. And all of them, bar the uncle, were saved in lifeboat 13. And all through his life, he found number 13 very, very lucky.
My mother worked in the high-class confectioners in Foregate Street, Worcester, and she fell in love with the owner, which was my father. And my father was married and lived in the Malvern shop, over the Malvern shop, and they decided to make a life in another world in San Francisco, California. And so he sold the 2 shops in Worcester, one in Bank Street, one in Foregate Street. He sold the 2 shops in Birmingham, and he gave the shop in Malvern to his wife, and quite a son of money because he was nearly a millionaire. And they went on the Titanic, to make matters worse, an assumed name of Marshall. How, I don't know, because I'm from the passport office in London and I don't quite know how that's happened. And of course my father went down with the boat. My mother was saved, and she was on the last lifeboat, number 13, and she was in the water in the boat 8 hours, and the Carpathia picked them up.
Well, my father was a chief steward on there, and he came off on the last lifeboat. We've been showing telegrams, you know, some from America to say that he was safe, others from Plymouth to say that they'd arrived there, and keys to the Veranda Cafe.
I'm the niece of a survivor who was crossing on the Titanic at the age of 19. She was going to work in America as a secretary. And I'm not sure which lifeboat she was actually in, but the family story goes that just as they were leaving, a baby was thrown into her arms, and she looked after the baby until they were rescued by the Carpathia. And I'm not sure how true this is, but it seems that the baby had lost both parents and was due to inherit a great fortune. And when they got to America, the other relatives of the child didn't want to know it.